Meanwhile, the European Union has now adopted a fourth package of sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The new sanctions target individuals and companies implicated in the assault on Ukraine. The EU presidency tweeted that the ambassadors of the bloc's 27 member nations have now approved the new measures, and the details of these sanctions were not disclosed. But reports now suggest that fresh sanctions will impose bans in spheres of investments, technology and more. The bloc has also approved a declaration to the World Trade Organization on revoking Russia's most favoured nation trade status. This could open the door to the bloc banning or imposing punitive tariffs on Russian exports. The European Commission President also said that the EU is working to suspend Russia's membership rights of leading multilateral institutions. This includes the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Since the war started last month, the EU has adopted tough measures targeting Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russia's financial system and its oligarchs. The EU said that the fourth set of sanctions will further isolate Russia and drain resources that it uses to finance this barbaric war. Under the successive rounds of sanctions, Russia's gross domestic product is forecast to shrink dramatically. Sanctions include an import ban on Russian steel and iron, an export ban on luxury goods, including cars, and these are worth more than $55,000. Even a ban on investments in oil companies as well as the energy sector. According to diplomats, the oligarch Roman Abramovich was among the individuals listed. The billionaire's assets in the EU can now be seized and his entry into the bloc can be refused. Abramovich is seen as providing, and I quote, a substantial source of revenue to Russia's government. The latest sanctions will be formally in place once they have been published in the EU's official journal. Now, for more details about the EU's recent decision, our correspondent Ross Cullen is now joining us live from Paris. Ross, thanks so much for joining us. My first question to you, we've heard of sanctions and different forms of sanctions going on since the war began. Another round of sanctions seemingly tougher than the last round imposed by the EU. What does this mean for Russia, and will they deter Vladimir Putin in any way?
Yeah, I've got the latest round of sanctions. The list has been released this morning, European time. We have a wide range of new restrictive measures from the European Union. It's the fourth package of sanctions since the war began on the 24th of February. This latest list of sanctions was announced on Thursday and Friday last week that they were going to bring it in over the weekend. And the last few days, the European Union officials have been working on this list, and they have now announced it includes a ban on importing steel and iron from Russia to the European Union. Brussels says that will cost Russia about $3.5 billion in lost revenue. A new ban on investments across Russia's energy sector. Also widening the list, extending the list of oligarchs on the sanctions list, including infamously Roman Abramovich, he holds Israeli and Portuguese citizenship, but he is well known as the owner of Chelsea Football Club, the English Premier League team. He's now also on that sanctions list. And there's going to be a ban on export of luxury goods here in the European Union. Very well known, worldwide renowned for luxury goods such as French handbags, Belgian diamonds and Italian luxury cars. There's going to be a ban on all those products. This is part of the European Union's strategy to try to increase the pressure politically and economically on the Kremlin, to try to, in the words of the European Union in this sanctions list that was released this morning, to try to cripple Russia's ability to finance its invasion of Ukraine.
Right, Ross, but I think the big question at this point is we've heard of the threat of sanctions being levied quite a number of times since this war began. We're now on day 20 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and still there seems to be no deterrence for the Russian troops, for President Vladimir Putin. We hear that several oligarchs, as you just mentioned, including Roman Abramovich, who have now been targeted in this list of sanctions. But will this affect Russia? Will it deter Russia from continuing to shell Ukraine?
That is the attempt by the European Union. There are three pillars to its strategy. It is trying to increase the pressure on Russia, as we just discussed, through widening and deepening its sanctions package. It's trying to show Ukraine that it is fully supportive of Ukraine, of the Ukrainian army, of the Ukrainian government, of the Ukrainian people standing behind Ukraine. So it's sanctions, support for Ukraine, and also diplomatic pressure. So trying to show that Russia is going to be even more isolated by more members of the European community, and ideally for the European Union, they want this to widen out to the worldwide community, to try to show it could possibly be expelled from the Council of Europe. Today they are showing that Russia is being more isolated. The European Union says Russia is being targeted more strongly and deeply with these sanctions. They say that Russia should be paying attention to the support the European Union is giving to Ukraine, but also the telephone lines are open. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, one of those leaders who is regularly in contact with Volodymyr Zelensky and regularly in contact with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, trying to show the Kremlin there is always a path for dialogue, there is always a telephone option, there is a route out of this war through peaceful negotiations, through peace talks and a resolution to this conflict, trying to show Russia that there is pressure being applied on them by the European Union, there is support for Ukraine from the European Union, but there is always also a dialogue path open. That telephone line is always open between Paris and Moscow, between Berlin and Moscow, to try to ensure that President Putin realises there is a lot of pressure being applied on him from different areas and in different sectors from Brussels to try to force the Russian president to change his course. And what Ukraine wants is two simple things. They want an end to the war and they want the withdrawal of all Russian forces from their soil.
Absolutely, Ross. Just a final question right there. Now, let's talk about the flip side of these sanctions. We've spoken about the impact of these sanctions on the Russian economy in particular. But given the global implications of sanctions, how will the rest of the world feel the pinch of sanctions on Russia?
We've seen some Asian countries as well, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, bring themselves into line to try to show that they are united with the European Union, and further afield, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, all joining in with applying economic and political pressure on Russia. You're right that it does have an impact on European consumers at home. The European Union leaders have tried to open up a multi-billion-dollar fund to try to support European consumers possibly being hit. They do not want Russia to be able to weaponize its gas supplies, for example, into Europe. So there is a structure being built by Brussels to try to help consumers. They've got some deadlines. They want a plan in place by mid-May this year for how they are going to wean themselves off dependence on Russian energy. Ideally, they want to do that in the next 5 years. By 2027, they want a plan in place this year, and they want a plan in place before October, so before winter 2022, of how they are going to support European consumers through the coldest months of the year.
Absolutely. Ross Cullen, thank you so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us from Paris on WION at this hour.
Presenting the News app, available on Google Play and App Store. Download it now.